Welcome back to Dreams of Disclosure. Tonight we journey across continents where the impossible became undeniable. From bustling airports to quiet rice fields, these are the nights when ordinary people looked up and witnessed something extraordinary. Close your eyes, settle in, and let these stories carry you into the unknown. The evening of July 7th, 2010 began like any other at Hangzhou Xiaochan International Airport. Departure boards flickered with destinations. Business travelers rushed toward gates. Families waited in terminal lounges, their luggage arranged around them like protective walls. The air hummed with the familiar rhythm of modern aviation. Predictable, controlled, efficient. Nothing suggested that within the hour, one of China's busiest airports would grind to a complete halt. Shortly after 8:30 p.m., air traffic controllers noticed something wrong. A radar return appeared in the approach corridor, strong, steady, and completely unauthorized. At first, they dismissed it as interference, perhaps a weather anomaly or system glitch. But the signal intensified, moving with deliberate purpose across restricted airspace. Controllers attempted radio contact with nearby aircraft. What came back shook them. 2 separate flight crews reported visual confirmation. A massive cigar-shaped object cutting across their flight path, glowing golden against the darkening sky. One pilot described it as elongated with a shimmering haze surrounding it, like heat waves rising from desert sand. Another compared it to a hovering lantern, except impossibly large and eerily steady. Whatever it wasn't following flight paths, and it wasn't broadcasting any identification code. The decision came swiftly. Controllers declared an immediate closure. Incoming flights diverted to Ningbo and Wuxi. Outbound planes already taxiing were ordered back to gates. In the terminals, passengers received vague announcements about operational issues. But in the tower, tension mounted as the object lingered for nearly an hour, hanging in restricted airspace like an uninvited guest who refused to leave. On the ground around Hangzhou, ordinary citizens witnessed the spectacle. In suburban neighborhoods, residents stepped onto balconies and saw the glowing object moving slowly across the night sky. Blurry photographs circulated online within hours, a luminous body with a trailing haze. Taxi drivers slowed their vehicles as passengers got out to watch. Farmers in the outskirts claimed it hovered in complete silence, its glow pulsing as if breathing. By morning, the story exploded across Chinese media. UFO shuts down Xiaoshan Airport, read headlines from China Daily and major publications. The use of the term UFO in state media, rare and significant, captured worldwide attention. CNN, BBC, and Reuters picked up the story, calling it one of the most dramatic aviation-related UFO incidents of the decade. Then came the silence. Within days, coverage inside China shifted. Official statements framed the closure as precautionary, suggesting possible military activities. Some outlets retracted earlier headlines. Online forums where photographs had been shared saw posts mysteriously disappear. The narrative fragmented. Abroad, it remained a sensational UFO story. At home, it faded into carefully managed silence. The Civil Aviation Administration of China claimed ignorance, citing only security reasons for the closure. Speculation emerged about military tests. The People's Liberation Army was known to conduct secret operations in the region, yet no official record ever linked that night's events to any scheduled operation. Another theory proposed a rogue private jet, but this strained credibility. Private aviation in China was tightly regulated, and the scale of the shutdown suggested something far more significant than a small craft. What makes the Hangzhou incident extraordinary is twofold: the scale of disruption and the brief window of official transparency. A major international airport shut down for nearly an hour. Aviation authorities treat safety as paramount. Closure is reserved for severe threats. Storms, accidents, Or in this case, an object they could neither identify nor communicate with. Several photographs remain in circulation. One shows a glowing object with a radiant tail, appearing like a luminous comet. Skeptics argue the images were long-exposure shots of airplanes, yet when matched with flight schedules and angles of approach, inconsistencies emerge. Other images suggest a structured craft emitting beams, though clarity remains frustratingly low. In the weeks that followed, rumors circulated that Chinese military officials seized radar logs and recordings. Civilian staff at the airport reportedly signed non-disclosure agreements. The estimated cost of delays and diversions ran into millions, a move unlikely to be triggered by anything mundane. The event remains unsolved. To this day, the Hangzhou Airport UFO serves as a reminder that even in the 21st century, unidentified aerial phenomena can bring an entire airport to its knees, leaving only fragments of testimony and a brief flare of media honesty before the curtain falls again. In the autumn of 2007, the eastern Himalayas held their breath. The town of Siliguri, nestled in West Bengal's tea plantations, was settling into evening routines. Farmers returned home along muddy paths. Lights flickered in hillside villages. The scent of damp earth and tea leaves hung in the cooling air. Nothing suggested that within minutes, dozens of people would witness something that would enter local folklore as one of India's strangest mass sightings. It began with plantation workers noticing an unusual glow in the northern sky. At first, they assumed it was Venus or Jupiter. Bright planets often linger in autumn evenings. But this glow was different. Too intense, too near, and it moved with deliberate purpose. Workers called neighbors from their homes, pointing at the shimmering object hovering just above the tea fields. Within minutes, dozens stood in the cool grass, staring upward. The object was a brilliant orb, golden white in color, radiating a haze that seemed to distort the air around it. Unlike an airplane, it made no sound. Unlike a helicopter, it showed no flashing navigation lights. Villagers estimated it hovered perhaps a few hundred meters above ground, large enough to be seen clearly against the darkening sky, close enough to feel threatening. For nearly 20 minutes, it hung in near silence, shifting slightly side to side, as though under intelligent control. Then something extraordinary happened. Smaller lights appeared to separate from the main body, moving in quick arcs before rejoining the central glow. Witnesses insisted these were not stars or lanterns. The movements were too purposeful, far sharper than drifting balloons or Chinese lanterns caught in wind currents. Panic rippled through some villages. Families gathered children indoors, shutting doors and latching windows as though against an intruder. Others remained outside, transfixed. One elderly farmer tried lighting incense, convinced it was a sign from the gods. Younger onlookers whispered about foreign aircraft. Or worse, something supernatural. Word spread quickly to Siliguri town itself. Shopkeepers closing their shutters saw the strange light. Commuters returning on scooters slowed to stare, some abandoning their rides entirely. The object remained visible from multiple points across town. Local journalists later interviewed witnesses who described it with remarkable consistency. A bright orb hovering for nearly half an hour, moving without noise, breaking into smaller lights, then vanishing without trace. By the time local police arrived, the phenomenon had ended. Officers admitted seeing a faint glow as they reached the area, but could describe nothing more. The official record referred only to strange light noted by several citizens. There was no follow-up investigation, and the matter seemed to dissolve into rumor. But for those who witnessed it, the memory burned bright. Several villagers told reporters the following day that they had seen the orb descend briefly toward the tea fields, low enough to illuminate the leaves in golden light. Others swore the smaller lights seemed to search the ground, darting left and right in deliberate patterns. When the main object finally vanished, it did so with sudden speed, shooting skyward until it disappeared, leaving only silence in its wake. Local newspapers carried short articles under headlines like "Mystery Light over Siliguri." These accounts were picked up briefly by regional television, with interviews from visibly shaken tea workers. Yet within days, national coverage was absent. In the flood of India's daily news, the story was reduced to a curiosity, buried beneath political disputes and economic reports. On a warm morning in 2004, in the heart of Cebu Island, a routine school day was unfolding. Children gathered in a courtyard for assembly. Teachers shepherded them into neat rows. The chatter of students carried across open air. The sky above was clear, the kind of pale blue typical of tropical mornings. It was in that moment of ordinary calm that hundreds of witnesses, both young and old, turned their eyes upward and saw something that remains unexplained to this day. It began with a shimmer, a bright glint in the sky, like sunlight caught on glass. Some students noticed first and pointed, their shouts breaking the rhythm of assembly. Teachers initially tried to quiet the children, assuming it was nothing more than an airplane or stray balloon. But as more eyes followed the pointing fingers, the atmosphere shifted. Suspended above the schoolyard was a glowing sphere, bright enough to stand out in full daylight. Witnesses described it as a fireball, yet not like any meteor they had seen before. It hovered rather than streaked. Its glow was steady, pulsing gently with a golden-white hue. At times, a faint haze seemed to radiate from its edges, as though heat were rippling the air around it. Unlike meteors, which blaze briefly and vanish, this object lingered for minutes at a time. Some teachers later told reporters they had the distinct impression it was observing the crowd below. Children panicked. Dozens screamed and tried to scatter, some running back toward classrooms, others clinging to their teachers. The adults, though unnerved, remained to watch. In January 2011, the rice fields near Yogyakarta in central Java were alive with their ancient rhythm. Farmers tended crops. Children ran narrow paths between paddies. In the evenings, the sound of insects and distant motorbikes filled the air. This was a landscape of routine, unchanged for generations. But one morning, villagers awoke to find something extraordinary etched into the green expanse, a perfect formation pressed into the rice with precision too sharp to ignore. The story began the night before. Residents in Sleman, a district just outside Yogyakarta, reported unusual lights in the sky. Witnesses described glowing orbs hovering low above the fields, shifting silently before disappearing. Some thought they were lanterns from a local festival. Others dismissed them as aircraft. But the next morning revealed something far more puzzling. In the middle of a rice paddy lay a sprawling circle nearly 70 meters across. The stalks were flattened in patterns of perfect symmetry, their shapes forming a floral motif unlike anything produced by chance or weather. Crowds quickly gathered. Farmers stood at the edge of the formation in disbelief. Children darted in and out of the design, tracing its edges with their fingers. By midday, word had spread to Yogyakarta, and journalists began arriving with cameras. Aerial photos soon appeared in Indonesian newspapers, showing the intricate pattern in full. It bore resemblance to crop circles reported for decades in England, geometric, symmetrical, executed with uncanny precision. For local residents, the discovery carried deep cultural resonance. In Javanese tradition, rice fields are sacred spaces tied to Dewi Shri, the goddess of fertility. To find such a design imprinted overnight felt both ominous and divine. Authorities responded swiftly. Police cordoned off the area to control swelling crowds. Scientists from nearby Gajah Mada University arrived to inspect the formation. Botanists examined the stalks, noting they were bent rather than broken, pressed flat in a manner suggesting exposure to heat or pressure. Some stalks appeared slightly scorched at the base. Meteorologists ruled out storms or wind. There had been no weather activity strong enough to produce such a formation. What deepened the mystery was the timing. The lights in the sky, seen by multiple witnesses, preceded the discovery. Several villagers described orbs hovering above the fields around 10 p.m., moving in silence before vanishing. One farmer claimed he saw a sudden flash of light, as though lightning had struck, though no storm clouds were present. To many, these reports provided a direct connection between the aerial phenomena and the ground formation discovered the following morning. By the second day, the site had become a pilgrimage of sorts. Thousands of visitors trekked to the field, some offering prayers, others snapping photos. Vendors appeared along the roads selling snacks, turning the mystery into a local spectacle. The crowds grew so large that farmers worried about damage to surrounding crops. Eventually, police set up barriers to limit access. The incident drew international attention. Images of the formation were published by Reuters and circulated widely online, bringing global speculation. Western media quickly labeled it a crop circle in Indonesia, linking it to decades of similar phenomena in Europe. Some UFO researchers pointed out that the lights reported the night before aligned with theories of unidentified craft creating crop impressions. Skeptics countered with claims of elaborate human hoaxing, though few in the village believed anyone local could have executed such a feat without being noticed. The complexity of the design and the absence of footprints or mechanical tracks challenged the hoax explanation. Creating such a large, symmetrical pattern overnight in the dark, without drawing attention, seemed nearly impossible in a rural setting where word travels fast. On a humid evening in 1999, the new Kuala Lumpur International Airport was settling into its night schedule. The facility had opened less than a year earlier, a gleaming symbol of Malaysia's modernization, its control tower rising above the runways like a beacon of the future. Flights from across Asia and Europe converged here, and air traffic controllers worked through their shifts with the steady hum of radar screens and radio chatter. But on that night, their calm routine was interrupted by a target they could not identify, a silent intruder crossing restricted airspace above the capital. It began just after sunset. The air was calm, the skies clear with visibility stretching for miles. A radar operator monitoring inbound traffic noticed a return that didn't match any flight plan. The blip moved at a steady pace, holding a line directly across an approach corridor. At first it was assumed to be a software glitch or false echo, but when a second scope showed the same contact, the operator called for confirmation. Radio calls went out to nearby commercial pilots. One captain inbound from Penang reported seeing something unusual, a glowing disc-like object hovering far above the horizon, bright enough to stand out against the last light of day. Another pilot confirmed the same, describing it as a luminous oval with a pale halo, moving without any flashing beacons or navigation lights. This was no conventional aircraft. In the 1970s, Niigata was known as one of Japan's busiest coastal cities, a hub of fishing fleets, shipping lines, and industrial growth along the Sea of Japan. On summer evenings, the port came alive with sounds of clanging metal, waves slapping against docked boats, and the constant drone of engines. Fishermen unloaded their catch, dock workers moved cargo, and harbour lights shimmered across black water. Against this backdrop of ordinary maritime life, a group of witnesses saw something that would never be explained. The sighting began just after dusk, when several fishing crews were returning to port. The first reports came from men working the decks who noticed a strange light hovering above the water. At first they thought it was a helicopter, but as their boats drew closer, the differences became clear. The light was too steady, the shape too sharp. What hovered over Niigata that evening was not an aircraft they recognized, but a bright metallic disc suspended a few hundred meters above the sea. Witnesses described the craft as circular, with a luminous edge that seemed to glow faintly. The body reflected the last light of the sun, almost mirror-like, but it also emitted its own radiance, giving the impression of both solid metal and ethereal light. It made no sound. The water beneath it lay still, without the turbulence a helicopter or jet would have created. One fisherman later said it looked as though a lantern had been hung in the sky, but larger than any house. The object remained in place long enough for many on the docks to gather and watch. Dock workers stopped loading cargo and pointed toward the glowing disk. Taxi drivers waiting for fares stepped out of their cars to see. For several minutes, the object simply hung above the harbor, motionless. Then, with no warning, it shifted abruptly to the side, covering a distance in seconds that no known aircraft of the era could have matched. Inside the local Coast Guard office, radar operators reportedly picked up a contact matching the object's position. The return was strong and distinct, confirming to those inside the control room that whatever was above the harbor was solid. But just as quickly as it had appeared, the blip darted off the screen, vanishing at a speed no conventional craft could achieve. The whir of a 16mm movie camera filled the quiet airfield in Great Falls, Montana, on the afternoon of August 15, 1950. Behind the lens, Nicholas "Nick" Mariana, general manager of the local professional baseball team, captured what he believed was routine footage of the ballpark. But within moments, his camera tilted skyward, following two bright silvery discs as they moved across the wide Montana sky. The brief reel of film he produced would become one of the most studied, debated, and enduring pieces of UFO evidence in American history. Mariana later explained that he had been preparing promotional shots for the Great Falls Electrics when a flash of light caught his attention. Looking up, he saw two objects, round and metallic, reflecting the afternoon sun. They flew in formation, moving smoothly and silently from northwest to southeast. His secretary, Virginia, also witnessed the objects, standing beside him as he hurried to swing the camera upward. He managed to capture about 16 seconds of footage before the discs vanished beyond a grain elevator. The film, though brief, was remarkable for its clarity. Frame by frame, two bright circular objects can be seen moving steadily across the sky. They don't resemble planes, birds, or weather balloons. The sequence is steady, with no signs of camera trickery. For many, it was the first convincing motion picture evidence of unidentified flying objects. When Mariana shared the film, it quickly attracted attention. Local newspapers reported on the sighting, and within weeks, the U.S. Air Force had taken possession of the reel for analysis under Project Grudge, the predecessor to Project Blue Book. Mariana claimed that when the film was returned, several frames were missing, specifically the opening shots where the discs had been most distinct. This allegation fueled suspicions that the Air Force had tampered with the evidence. The official explanation from the Air Force was that the objects were reflections of F-94 jet fighters that had been flying near Great Falls at the time. But many who studied the footage disagreed. The motion of the objects was too smooth, their reflectivity too steady, and their shape too consistent. The jets in the area didn't match the path or appearance of what Mariana filmed. In the years that followed, the Great Falls film was repeatedly re-examined. The Robertson Panel in 1953, convened by the CIA to evaluate UFO evidence, studied the footage but dismissed it as inconclusive. In the 1960s, the Condon Committee at the University of Colorado reviewed the film again. Interestingly, their own photographic experts concluded that the objects were not birds, balloons, or aircraft, and that they appeared to be anomalous. September 20th, 1977 began like any other autumn morning in Petrozavodsk, a city on the shores of Lake Onega in northwestern Russia. The sky was still dark at 4:00 a.m., the streets nearly empty. When the first witnesses noticed something unusual above the horizon, a glowing object brighter than the stars, it appeared suddenly and expanded into a massive radiance over the city. Within minutes, dozens of people stopped what they were doing to stare upward, transfixed by a display that would soon be reported across half a dozen countries. Residents later described the sight as a giant jellyfish of light hanging in the pre-dawn sky. It glowed in shifting colors, red, orange, and white, and radiated beams that seemed to fall to the earth like luminous rain. For more than 10 minutes, the object hovered silently over Petrozavodsk, pulsing and expanding. Witnesses said the beams lit up entire neighborhoods, casting long shadows across streets and making the surface of Lake Onega shimmer unnaturally. Workers on their way to factories stopped to watch. Nurses at a local hospital gathered at windows to describe the shower of rays falling from the sky. Drivers pulled their vehicles to the side of the road, unable to ignore the spectacle. For some, the fear was immediate. Was this a missile test gone wrong? A nuclear blast in its early stages? The Cold War made such questions unavoidable. But Petrozavodsk was not alone. The same luminous display was seen across the wider Karelia region, in parts of Finland, and as far as Denmark. Pilots flying over the Baltic reported unusual lights on the horizon. In total, hundreds of witnesses across multiple countries described the same thing: a radiant object expanding into a giant sphere, releasing beams of light that looked like rain falling from the heavens. The fact that TASS, the Soviet news agency, acknowledged the event at all was significant. In an era when unexplained sightings were often suppressed, the Petrozavodsk phenomenon was openly admitted and widely reported in foreign press. Scientists were divided. Some argued it must have been related to a Plesetsk satellite launch, perhaps a fuel release in the upper atmosphere creating a massive glowing cloud. Others rejected this explanation, pointing out that the beams of light appeared structured, directed, and far more persistent than any known rocket exhaust. The fishermen were used to the stillness of the lake before dawn. In the early 1960s, the waters of Lake Victoria stretched dark and endless, broken only by the splash of oars and the flicker of lanterns used to draw fish to the surface. But on one particular night, that stillness was shattered when a brilliant glow appeared just above the horizon. At first, the men assumed it was a flare from a distant vessel. Then the glow swelled into something far brighter, detaching itself from the horizon and rising silently into the air. Startled, the fishermen dropped their nets and stared upward. Some later recalled that the light felt alive, pulsing and rippling as it hovered. Other boats scattered across the Ugandan side of the lake saw the same thing. Crews shouted warnings to one another, their voices carrying across the water. Some paddled desperately for shore, convinced that a foreign aircraft was about to crash. Others remained frozen, too shocked to move. Reports from the Tanzanian coast soon confirmed that the event had not been isolated. Villagers in shoreline settlements awoke to a glow flooding their huts. Families rushed outside and watched as a radiant sphere hovered low above the water. Beams of light appeared to descend from the object, sweeping back and forth across the lake as though searching for something beneath the surface. For several minutes, the object remained steady. Then, to the astonishment of all watching, it began gliding along the water's surface. Witnesses compared it to a lantern skimming the waves, though no flame burned and no sound carried across the lake. The reflection beneath it trailed like a second orb of light, rippling across the water as it moved. When the object finally rose higher, it did so with sudden speed. Several witnesses said it ascended vertically, shooting upward until it became a pinpoint star, and then vanished. Others insisted that before vanishing, the light split into smaller orbs that darted away in separate directions before reuniting. By dawn, word of the event had spread widely. In markets on the Ugandan side, fishermen described a sun that came at night and a star that danced on the water. On the Tanzanian coast, elders recalled children crying as beams swept across the village. The stories varied in detail but agreed on the essentials. A silent, luminous object, low over the lake, moving with purpose, and gone as suddenly as it arrived. The object has never been identified. No satellites, no rockets, no known aircraft match the behavior described. For those who saw it, no natural explanation has ever erased the memory. To them, it was not illusion or mistake. It was real, structured, and foreign. As always, thank you for being here with Dreams of Disclosure. These stories remind us that the extraordinary can appear anywhere, from rice fields to runways, from schoolyards to sacred lakes. The phenomenon spreads, touches lives, and leaves us with questions that echo through the decades. Sleep well, and may your dreams carry you to the edges of the unknown.